guys, what's going on? It's Ash here coming at you today in Raid Shadow Legends. Today we're going to talk about the hardest hitting AOE nukes inside the game. Top 5 nukes for each rarity. In the past, we've done videos like this. A, not including the new champions added to the game, and B, just doing it just overall, nukes in the game, and it inevitably ends up being a list of just like 8 or 9 legendary champions with 1 or 2 epics thrown in. So I thought I'd give the top 5 in each rarity for today's video. Before we jump into this, guys, I do want to put out a quick disclaimer because there's so many kind of nuances to the hardest hitting ability in the game. We will not be including champions like War Mother, Lord Shazar, who actually have bombs that detonate, a few turns later. If you include the bomb damage, they would be, the hardest hitting AOE nukes in the game, but we're not going to include those champions in today's video. We're also not going to include ally attack champions, because you can make a case they're AOE as well, but it depends. It's dependent on the allies they're attacking with, right? So we're not going to include ally attack. We're not going to include bombs. And we're also not going to include the max HP champions, AOE Husk and AOE Royal Guard. You guys know I'm a huge fan of these champions, but these max HP ability champions, it's largely predicated again on the max HP of the target that you're attacking. So it can't be dependably in every kind of area of the game. Arena, for example, can't be dependently the hardest hitting nukes inside the game. All right, whew, that was a lot of qualifiers there, but hopefully it makes some sense to you guys. Also champions like Biggin, champions like Bellower, champions like Ethos, shockingly won't make the list. They're some of the best sheer damage dealers inside the entire game. However, when it comes to one ability, they're 3 AOE nukes, for example, or 2 AOE nukes, depending on the champion you're talking about. They're actually not the hardest, the top 5 of the hardest hitting in their respective categories. So I know in the comments you're gonna be like, dude, where's, Biggin? One of the best damage, if not the best sheer damage dealer without qualifications in the game, but none of his abilities, and Ethos too, but none of their abilities actually hit the top 5 when it comes to multipliers. So let's go ahead and start with, guys, I have 4 rares and 1 uncommon kind of snuck in there. I figured I'd include them. I doubt many of you, maybe some of you, will know what uncommon we're talking about here, but let's go ahead and start first with Kale. A few of these rares are going to be super obvious. 3 starting champions on the list here in Aethel didn't make the top 5 in the rare / uncommon, but she's right there. She would have made top 5 if the uncommon didn't beat her in that position. Acid Rain on the A2 attacks all enemies. It's, a 15% chance of inflicting a critical hit, extra chance, and then fills a turn meter. A lot of us, myself included, rely on Kale to be our campaign farmer inside the early game, in the mid game, in the game. Super good ability, Acid Rain, right? Not much more to say about it. Next up is going to be, let's just go over to High Elves. Let's just jump right to number 1. Sorry for going out of order here. The best ability in terms of overall damage inside the entire game for rare champions is actually Elhane's A2. Attacks 1 enemy, then attacks all enemies. Has an extra 15% chance of inflicting a critical hit. Places an increased crit rate buff on this champion for 3 turns if the target is killed. So there's a reason this ability is on a 4-turn cooldown instead of a 3-turn cooldown like Kale's ability, is because it's the hardest hitting ability for a rare champion inside the game. Sheer damage potential is higher than all the other stars on this A2. Speaking of other stars, moving things right along here, let's go to the guy who never gets enough love, Galek. Galek is also his A2, attacks all enemies on Hellraiser, then places a 15%, another 15% extra chance of inflicting a critical hit, if I can say that fast enough, and 30% increased speed buff on this champion for 2 turns as well. Hellraiser, I can definitely attest to, is a very surprisingly hard-hitting ability. Nice to see that on Galek. Did I lie? I lied to you guys. I said Bellower you won't see on this list. He actually is. He sneaks in at number 5, but before that, let me give you the uncommon, guys. It's not, Saurus, it's not Shield Guard. It's actually this dude. It's Outriders A3. Salvo on a 3-turn cooldown, attacks all enemies. Very simple ability, but it actually has really, really solid, I think a 4.3 multiplier on the Salvo ability. So really solid. If you're looking for a hard-hitting AoE champion, look no further than Outrider on his A3. He's not as interesting as Shield Guard because he doesn't have that turn meter fill, and his damage is not based on defense, and it's not a 2-turn cooldown. So I'm not saying these champions are better than some of their counterparts, just in terms of sheer damage. Look no further again than Outriders A3. And then we can get to my man Bellower. He actually does come in at number 5. I apologize. The other champions were not included though. And Bellower's A2 is his hardest hitting ability. Of course, he does have an AOE on his A1 and AOE on his A3, but his A2 hits the hardest. Mighty Bellow, named very appropriately, 3-turn cooldown, attacks all enemies, and then has a 75% chance when booked of placing a decreased speed. I should mention 2 things before we jump into the epic category, guys. Thing number 1 is that all of these numbers are factored in, assuming these champions are booked, okay? So just a note for you guys that these are including the extra damage. You know, on Kale, for example, he has 4 levels of extra damage. It's considering that they are booked up. It's also taking into account their attack and their multipliers, kind of combining all of that in terms of the sheer damage output. And thing number 2 is I have to give a big shout out to Ash Voyager's RSL damage multipliers spreadsheet, which I will link for you guys in the show notes below. I don't know the guy personally, but he puts out the multipliers as soon as new champions are released. He puts them right into the spreadsheet, puts in all their multipliers, and guess what? I'll just show it off for you guys real quick. Give this guy some love because it's a lot of work. No idea how he does it. Don't ask me what half of this stuff means. Just spent a few hours kind of going through it here, right? But he has every champion, and then he has all their multipliers listed. He has their sheer damage output as well. He has them all tabbed out by rarity. You can see their A2 booked, unbooked, etc., etc. So definitely check out that website, guys. It's a really, really cool resource to have. And of course, the source of all this information in today's video. Let's go to the epics, guys. So let's start out with let's actually go in order this time. This is one of my crushes. If you saw the video with me and Darth Microtransaction ranking the top babes in the game, I had Luthia on my list. She also makes another guest appearance in back-to-back videos here on the channel. My girl coming in with her A3 Numbing Poison is the 5th hardest hitting ability for epic champions on an AOE nuke. On a 4-turn cooldown, attacks all enemies, has a 100% chance of placing a 30% decrease speed debuff for 2 turns. Damage based on attack. Coming in at number 4 is going to be a demon spawn champion, and it's going to be Hellgazer. So Hellgazer's A3 is another incredibly hard-hitting ability, Malign Lightning. Attacks all enemies on a 4-turn cooldown. On each critical hit, fills his champion's turn meter by 10%. I wish I had all these champions maxed out so I could show you guys the damage. Pretty insane stuff here that Hellgazer comes through with a very, very hard-hitting A3. Coming in next is going to be a Night Revenant champion, who we don't really talk about much here on the channel at all. It is Pitiless One. Pitiless One's A2 has an incredible damage multiplier and sheer damage output, attacks all enemies on projectile burst on a 3-turn cooldown. Each critical hit boosts this champion's turn meter by 15%. So love to see that turn meter boost built into a 3-turn cooldown on projectile burst. Very cool champion. Each critical hit heals this champion 50% of the damage inflicted as well. So pretty cool, man. Maybe I should max out Pitiless One, right? Seems like, let's see, champion turn meter again on the A1 as well. I don't know. Any of you guys use Pitiless One? I haven't really messed around too much with him, but yeah, definitely a champion worth checking out. Look no further in the Night Revenant category for number 2. It's going to be Skullcrown. Skullcrown's A2 comes in at number 2, attacks all enemies, and of course has a 75% chance of placing a 25% weaken debuff for 2 turns on a 3-turn cooldown to go along with her other A1, attacks all enemies. Nice to see this nuker still has what it takes here in terms of the most powerful hard-hitting abilities inside the game. In Skullcrown number 2, and I guess it's a good time to mention another champion I will not include on this list because Seer's Karma Burn ability is based on enemy max HP and the number of buffs that are on both your allies and on the enemy team. So again, there's too many factors in there for me to reliably say take her into the arena and she's an OP nuker on her very first go round, right? So that won't be there in case some of you guys are asking. Hopefully I've covered all of these like DQs that I have in the video here, but number 1 is going to be Lua. Lua's A2, in terms of sheer damage output, attacks all enemies 3 times on a 3-turn cooldown. Each critical hit heals this champion by 2.5% HP. There it is, Lua. So, you know, each of those 3 waves of hits obviously are not individually the hardest hitting ability, but when you add them all up, that is the hardest hitting nuke for AOE champions, aside from, of course, or excuse me, for AOE epic champions, aside from, of course, the max HP champions, the Seers, the Royal Guards, etc., given those qualifiers that we've already talked about. Let's go ahead and move things right along to the legendary champions. Coming in at number 5 is Ray on her A2. So this does have a qualifier on it of sorts, but to me, it's one thing if the champion, well, you guys can read it, attacks all enemies, inflicts 50% more damage against targets under debuffs. So you could still make this so that, I guess you could say the same thing about Seer. I guess with all due respect for Seer, we probably should have included her on this list. Let's just pretend she was included at, you know, 1.5 ranking or 0.5 ranking, okay? Because if we're going to be fair, we should also put Ray, because we're assuming here on her A2 that the enemies do have debuffs, okay? So Arcane Wave, if the enemies have debuffs on a 4-turn cooldown, is her hardest hitting ability. If not, then her A3 is her hardest hitting ability, Banish. So again, if they're under debuffs, hits harder on the A2. If not, then Banish hits harder on the A3. Speaking of qualifiers, this is a champion I'm sure a lot of you guys did not expect to see on this list, but you can't argue with the facts. It's Rabar. Rabar's A3 is an incredibly hard-hitting ability, but it does have a caveat. Attacks all enemies. Damage increases if the target is under sleep, stun, or freeze. So if the target is under those debuffs, it is the 4th hardest hitting of AOE nuke ability inside the game, minus max HP champions. Let's go ahead and move on to number 3 here. Really insane multipliers on both of his AoE attacks, Wild Swing and Merciless Assault. If only his speed wasn't a god-awful 87, a very high base attack. And remember, these aren't just multipliers, they're also multipliers factoring in their base attack. Number 3 is going to be a Dark Elf champion. Any guesses? It is Foley. So Foley comes in with his Sealed Fate ability on a 4-turn cooldown at a really high. Obviously these are the 3 strongest nukes we've talked about here in the top 3 so far in the video. Attacks all enemies, decreases their turn meter by 15%, then attacks the targeted enemy. Enemies killed by this skill cannot be revived on a 4-turn cooldown. I do want to give an honorable mention before we jump into the top 2 here, guys, and that is going to be to a champion that's gotten a lot of grief, I guess. Not a lot of big fans of Yarkarl the Scourge. This one is a really hard-hitting ability if you add up all the damage. Attacks one enemy 3 times. If the target is under freeze, it will do an AoE attack after that. If you add up the damage from the AoE attack with the 3 single target attacks on Glaciate, assuming they're under freeze on a 4-turn cooldown, then he also is an incredibly hard-hitting champion. Wanted to give that shout out there. Let's move on to the top 2 here in number 2. It is, of course, Trunda. Trunda has been widely considered to be the best nuker for a long time inside the game, and it's for very good reason. On her A2, it has one of the highest multipliers inside the game, but it attacks one enemy, then attacks all other enemies. So it's only hitting, that extra enemy attack is, the extra AoE attack, is 60% of the damage inflicted from the first hit. Now her A3, if you factor in it hitting twice, and which is why she's so prominently used inside Platinum Tier Arena, inside the arena in general, she's my arena nuker. You build her with very low accuracy, and then she hits 2 times on Forge Rhythm. That ability, if it's landing 2 times, is the hardest hitting ability, the second hardest hitting AoE nuke inside the game there. So really cool. Trunda's been a long-time favorite of so many players inside the game. You can't really get much better in that high base attack too when you're looking for an arena nuker or just a really solid AoE nuker. They also just fixed her A2, so now it will actually use this ability when she's on auto, which is nice to have. When you have one of the hardest hitting abilities in the game, it's nice when you actually use it. All right, so let's go to number 1, guys. Any guesses? Any guesses who #1 in the game is? I might have mentioned it in passing on a previous video, and now that I think of it, I'm probably going to put it on the thumbnail, so I'm sure all of you guessed. It is Thea the Tomb Angel. At the time of this recording, nobody in the world has her yet, because she is a Doom Tower only champion. But you get her from unlocking, or from beating secret rooms, unlocking keys inside Hard Doom Tower. And check it out. Hex Reaper is by far, if the enemies have Hex, and this lands on a 5-turn cooldown, this is hitting over double the damage that Lua does in total on her A2. You know, the total damage output here is almost a third higher than Trunda's A3, okay? Attacks all enemies, damage increases by 50% for each Hex debuff on the enemy team, stacks up to 300%. So, as you guys, can guess from this, even if only a couple of them have a Hex buff, you're getting 100% damage boost onto an already very hard-hitting ability. This, when it lands, if you factor in not even the whole 300%, I think you only need about 100% or so extra, 150% extra to be the hardest hitting ability. But if you can get the 300% Hex on the enemy team, then she is the hardest hitting champion inside the game. I also want to make a quick mention of Candrafon, right? So a champion like Candrafon as well, if he's under Veil. So damage increases by 40% while under Veil. So if he's under Veil, then he almost cracks the top 5, or he does crack the top 5 as well. The reason he's used so much in the arena is not just his affinity, which is Force, very difficult for a lot of people inside the arena in the current meta, but also this Butcher's Glee. If it kills an enemy, it resets the cooldown of On the Hunt skill as well. So it's a really nice versatility there. Also has one of the hardest hitting A1s inside the entire game in Punish Hubris. So guys, I think that we talked about pretty much all the hardest hitting abilities inside the game. Let me know, which of these champions were you most surprised out of? I mean, there were a couple surprises on the list. Pitiless one for me, really Luthia for me as well, Hellgazer for me, Robar I knew about already, but yeah, Outrider, I guess, as well. Guys, let me know who's your favorite AOE nuker for anywhere inside the game, minus the max HP champions. I appreciate you guys watching this video, and as always, take care, guys.